Well, welcome to Forthright, and I have a special guest today, Dr. Ed Schweitzer from Schweitzer Engineering Labs. Welcome, Ed.
Well, thank you. Good morning.
And what triggered this conversation is an open letter that Dr. Schweitzer sent to our elected officials, employees, customers, and community regarding some recent actions of the Public Utilities Commission. Before we get into that letter, perhaps you could do the 1 minute elevator speech of what is Schweitzer Engineering Labs and your background, and then why you're interested in this subject.
Our company, Schweitzer Engineering, is a 100% employee-owned company headquartered in Pullman, Washington. Our purpose is to make electric power safer, more reliable, more economical. And some of the ways that we go about doing that is we serve electric power utilities and major users of electric power by manufacturing protective relaying equipment, meters, SCADA systems, cybersecurity related devices, and computers, communications equipment. And we're,
Okay.
uh, as I said, 100% employee owned. And our verbs are to invent, design, manufacture, sell, support, teach just about anything that has to do with the control, metering, protection, and use of electric power.
Okay. So I've been interested in your company because I have some questions I want to ask you later about keeping the grid secure and just about how the grid operates for people's understanding. But to start with, the Utilities Commission, which is supposed to be the watchdog for consumers, made a recent ruling after PG&E, Puget Sound Energy, asked for a rate increase. And so, if you tell a little bit about your letter, and I'm going to go ahead and post the letter on the Substack that goes with this video.
I was concerned when I read in one of the newspaper articles that the Attorney General's office had the Attorney General's office had urged the Public Utility Commission to um, not allow Puget Sound Energy to put in its bills to you and me for natural gas services any line item particular to the costs of the cap and trade um, bill that Washington state legislators um, passed and the governor signed. So the very purpose of the public utility commissions in the United States go back to the days of Thomas Edison and his business partner Samuel Insull. And they realized that the best way to go forward with electric power and also with natural gas was regional franchises. So if you do a regional franchise, and if Sulani gets the franchise and Ed wants to go in there and build generation, transmission, and distribution resources, I can't do it because you got the franchise. So then what's going to keep Sulani gas and electric company from gouging everyone else, all of the customers?
Well,
And the
hopefully, I would
answer,
not do that. But yes, the Public
yeah,
Utilities Commission is supposed to step in.
that's right. So then that's where the PUCs came in, and Edison and Insull acknowledged that. And they wanted these regional franchises because capital always gets its pay. And those are Samuel Insull's words. So there's the challenge. And then some people say that these PUCs are non competitive. And that's not true because Sulani Gas and Electric does need to cooperate with and therefore compete right alongside Ed Schweitzer Gas and Electric in a neighboring franchise. So we would tend, through the openness of the PUCs, to be able to see one another's books and learn from each other. And that provided a very successful and meaningful level of cooperation and openness that and another level of ensuring that both your and my customers were getting paying a fair price for their gas and electricity. So here, when the when Attorney General Bob Ferguson puts a little pressure from his powerful office on the three PUC commissioners to, hey, don't give them their rate increase. We're okay with that, but don't put in the fact that don't put a line item in there. And the commissioners might have asked why, and he did answer because, well, if there was a line item for everything in the utility bill, it would be too hard for us to, we the people, to understand our gas and electric bills. So, bottom line here is that it appears to me, this is just one person's opinion, uh, that the Attorney General's office is has pressured the public utility commissioners to the point where that they ended up doing something that was contrary to their purpose, namely ensuring that there's the openness in the open books that ensure that we the people are getting a good deal. Put another way, it's a hidden expense that the
That's
utilities have to hide somewhere.
and it certainly goes against the whole concept of having transparency in costs
Indeed,
and billing.
it does.
And so I'm happy to provide a little more a daylight on this situation by highlighting your letter, and I appreciate that you sent it. And I'm hoping that this creates some more conversation this next year, especially as Attorney General Ferguson is running for governor. I think he stopped saying it's an exploratory campaign, and um, and is trying to claim to be a champion of transparency when in this case he clearly was not. Um, I think that whole idea of getting more information out to people is actually why I want to segue to my other question in having you as an interviewee today, which is about your background and your information on how the grid works. Because one of the other areas we're not getting a lot of transparency is in the siting of renewables. Since the legislature said that, hey, if you're going to put in wind or solar, you don't have to go to the counties to get permission for that land use like any other industry would. You can jump over the county and go straight to a state board that's appointed by the governor that has its own agenda. And we're seeing that come out with a proposal that's being sort of currently being wrestled over in Benton County, I think it is. It would convert 6,000 acres of farmland to solar panels, which certainly affects the environment in many ways. And so this transparency is going to be even more important in utilities issues going forward. But before people can ask good questions, they need to know a little bit more about, what's going on right now with the safety and security of the grid. What do you see as the biggest vulnerabilities that Washington should be working on?
Mm-hmm. Well, many years ago, a bunch of legislators newly elected from the state house in Idaho did a North Idaho legislators tour. So they got a little lost, ended up over in Pullman, and I said, "Well, we'll give you a tour and uh, the and I'll buy you lunch if you listen. Let me give a little talk." See, so they did, and the end of it, one of the legislators asked me a question. Should Idaho have a renewable energy policy like Washington State? And I wasn't expecting the question, and I thought about it for a minute and responded, I'll make you a deal that I won't write law if you don't design the power system. So the way this all used to work, let's go back to, again to refer to the days of Edison and Insull, these regional franchises that within them, the utility holding the franchise was responsible for generation transmission, and distribution of the electric power. There was one necktie or one scarf to grab onto. The CEO of Washington Water Power at the time here in Eastern Washington, who generated the power, transmitted it, and distributed it. And uh, fast forwarding to the time, the days of Enron, who called themselves the smartest guys in the room. I guess maybe they were the smartest crooks in the room. I don't know. But they decided that we've been doing this wrong forever, and that instead of it being generation, transmission, distribution like this sort of potato stamped across the country, that it should be sliced this way. The generating companies of here all deregulated because that's the market they wanted to play in. The transmission assets of these various franchises should really be treated as a grid, which it never was. It was a whole bunch of intertie agreements for the mutual benefit of neighboring power companies. Another very physical, very economical, very capital intensive uh, business interconnection as well as electrical that led to reasonable competition between areas. And to take all those intertie agreements, essentially, all these transmission lines, and pretend that they're a grid, and they're not. So, and then the distribution companies are supposed to buy the electricity out of this grid as if they're you and me going to a Saturday market, farmers market buying vegetables. So there's been this tremendous amount of market distortion, if you will, when the Enron guys, with the help of people in both political parties, this is a bipartisan problem, if you will, had their way with FERC 888, FERC 889, which said, yep, utility industry should be reorganized along these lines. So I think that's contributed to this, where the people, leadership abhors a vacuum. So when there's no longer this tight connection between G, T, and D within a franchise, then who's in charge? So that's where you see CalISO and ERCOT and such regional organizations have to be invented who don't own any of the assets. So there's really no shareholders to whom they are responsible. Yeah, we end up with kind of a gooey mess here. Those deregulated generators, what about them? Well, they have no obligation to provide sufficient assets to supply everybody's wall outlets in any part of the region because there is no more a region. It's all just one great big area. So going back to this idea that the state should usurp county responsibility in land use, that's one more um, very regrettable move away from uh, the limited powers of government that our founding fathers gave to us. We're so blessed that these guys during the benefited so much from the uh, great minds during the Age of Enlightenment to think up a government of limited and specific powers, or the powers are specific and enumerated in our Constitution, and everything else is left up to the states. So I think that's pretty cool. So then there's states. Washington is choosing to usurp the power at the state level power from the counties. So go ahead and let them do it. In Idaho, a different laboratory is choosing not to do that. So here's just to take the tale of two states, if you will, that the states compete with one another, even though they are, in some sense, political franchises. So I
So
think Washington State's making a big mistake getting that as politicians get more and more in the energy business, uh, the electricity at our wall outlets will become more and more expensive as it has, and less dependable.
So what I just heard for the first time, I haven't understood, is when we're talking about the electrical grid, it really wasn't set up that way. It was set up as a series of vertically integrated systems that were generating and distributing the whole, generating the power and distributing it and providing it to users,
Absolutely.
transmission and distribution. And so there were a series of those, and they were each serving a distinct region side by
Correct.
side. And now that's been sliced off and reformulated in three layers, but there was never any, this makes sense actually. There was never any overall, we're going to design a grid that covers the whole country. It was all of these distinct regional entities. And so we've sort of lost that. And that's going to leave us, as each of us, in fact, you and I were talking earlier about each individual is going to become their own generating station. If we go to the extreme of really electrifying everything, it's like we're pushing that electrification onto individuals as well, so that I might become my own little vertically integrated module here, but still tied into the grid if I were backfeeding generating power back into the grid.
So you and I both live in Washington State, different parts of the state to be sure. And there's a lot of times of the year, just because we're relatively far north, there's not a lot of sunlight.
Yeah.
So areas such as California, Arizona, parts of Texas, solar works out maybe pretty, certainly a lot better there, but they're this far north, it's not nearly as productive of a resource. And plus the sun doesn't shine at night. So then we get into the storage requirements. And here in Washington State, my goodness, we're blessed with all the cheap, clean hydro. And one of the most beautiful things about the hydro is that you store energy behind the dam.
Mm-hmm.
So think how well then when the intermittent resources fit sort of hand in glove with the hydroelectric power resources in our state. Grand Coulee Dam, and then all the dams on the Snake River. One that's nearest to us is Lower Granite, for example. And there are people who would take out these dams for environmental reasons that I am not so sure are all that. Uh, if they'll really hold water, if I can make sort of a pun here. Uh, but and then you destroy something which is vital to the green energy um, movement, if you will. Hey, what makes the biggest Achilles heel of solar and wind is intermittency. The
Mm-hmm.
wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine, and you and I um, need to charge our cars or air condition our homes or cook our food when we need to be doing these things. And electricity is this beautiful miracle. We've learned to move energy at the speed of light, the flick of a switch, you know, and the idea that you can turn intermittent energy into dependable energy with the use of water stored behind a dam, which is a hell of a lot cleaner and cheaper, frankly, than doing it with batteries, that we're blessed that we can put these things together in our area through the transmission networks.
Well, just a little bit on the engineering side, another piece of this continuing push to electrify the transportation sector, to take natural gas out of buildings, to electrify all building processes. And as a retired architect, I'm quite aware of how mechanical systems are critical in the
Mm-hmm.
buildings and the size of those systems. It's going to take a lot of building out of and expanding the network of generation and transmission lines. What do you see as some of the engineering challenges, things that people should be thinking about that don't often come up in when this is covered? I've written about, for instance, I've written about one of the log jams is going to be just the number of linemen. We simply do not have the workforce to install the transmission lines that they're talking about on the timeline. What are some other challenges that our log jams will have to deal with?
My mom taught us kids this little poem that goes, it's just a rhyme, I guess. Patience is a virtue. Practice it if you can. It's seldom found in woman and never found in man. So I think we have to be patient with this what the Germans call energy venda, this big energy change that I think it's really exciting that there's a human pursuit continuously through. I'm going to be 76 here in a little bit. That through all of my lifetime, I've seen it. That the energy industry, uh, all industry, is trying to do more with less, uh, uh, making products better, cheaper, faster, simpler, and cleaner. That this, if even Insull said it 105 years ago, more or less, he said something like, because people were concerned about burning coal then,
Mm-hmm.
a century ago.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, hey, today, because of engineering and science, we're able to generate the same amount of coal using 1 pound, same amount of electricity using 1 pound of coal as just a couple of years ago we did with 2 pounds of coal. So, I know coal's a four-letter word, but, we are moving that way as a society. We want to do things. Nobody wants to live in dirty air, dirty water, and it's a natural human need and desire to be healthy, and it's in every one of us. So we will get there. We will get there. In fact, we are getting there. Tremendous advances um, in my lifetime in the efficiency of generation, transmission, distribution, and use of energy. I
Mm-hmm.
think the net carbon footprint of the United States today in 2023 is about the same as it was in the mid 70s.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. Just an
Especially
amazing.
with the growth in the population and in the economy. Yeah, it is.
I may not have those numbers quite right, but it's a tremendous advancement. And it's a natural thing. And, good um, economic decisions foster good environmental practices. Waste is expensive. Waste is messy. So you eliminate waste, you save money, and you things, clean things up. So it's sort of a natural thing that some patience with it is good. When we start tipping the scales, with these government mandates, where the government knows better than a power company or one of its consumers uh, how to generate, transmit, distribute electricity, there's, I think we should take pause and say, well, who's the experts here? And when the utilities, I think Edison and Insull never could have envisaged so much government intervention into uh, their regional franchises, and that
Mm-hmm.
we're paying for it. We're paying for this with much higher prices. Parts of the country are paying for it with less dependable service, namely California and Texas. There's so much written about that. So, what are people going to do? They're going to go out and do things that, frankly, are capital wasteful. They're wasteful of capital, and frankly, they're not all that clean because they are wasting capital. For example, if a Texas business is worried about, say, it's a restaurant and food's going to spoil, and if the electricity goes out, the restaurant buys a diesel set. In fact, if then Then you got a tank of diesel fuel to deal with, so you can have electricity when the lights go out. Diesels are, well, they can be pretty darn efficient, but they're not as efficient as a combined cycle gas plant that a utility would build today. They're not even as efficient as old coal plants. So they're good, but especially the smaller ones can never compete with the central electric generating facilities. And you could say, well, we'll put in more solar and wind, but the utilities still face the intermittent nature of that. And because there are so many outside influences that the companies, and we've lost that regional franchise where you and I would know who is really responsible for the generation, transmission, and distribution. We're going to go buy more backup generators, whether it's gas or propane or diesel or how we fuel it.
We actually have a diesel backup generator on the ranch, and we had to use it last week for about a almost a 12-hour outage because a single pole went out that served quite a large area, although it's a low density area. It was only about, I think Avista said 346 customers, but covering a good chunk of Eastern Lincoln County. And there was actually a bit of a delay in addressing it to begin with, because first they had to decide if it was an Avista pole or an Inland Power and Light pole. And we're sitting there in the fire truck giving them the pole number and telling them, no, it says it's your pole. You got to come and fix it. But yeah, we have a diesel generator because we need backup power, because we need to have, we have water for animals. We need to have, we're operating businesses out of a branch is a business. We're operating a business. So I get your analogy with if we have a less reliable power supply because we've forced it into tipping the balance between renewables and constant on-demand generation, then we create a situation where we're counterproductive if the goal is to have a cleaner energy system.
Precisely. Your and my diesel sets. In Idaho, we have a place where a couple of them are propane, but the unit that my wife and I have at home is diesel. The ones over at work are all diesel because of the size. Yeah, that's the way to go. And uh, collectively, these things take a lot of resources to manufacture. And of course, all those manufactured goods have an economic and environmental impacts. And Insul realized, and most of the time they don't run. They're just sitting out there just
Right.
in case. When all the stuff in California got going with Enron, uh, the reliability experts predicted that this is in the 90s, I guess, maybe right around 2000. They predicted that there was going to be, maybe a 10%, 5 or 10% likelihood of service interruptions, even affecting Eastern Washington. So I made the capital decision at SEL that there's no way I was going to risk disappointing our customers by not being able to make, protective relays and, do our jobs for the industry, keeping the lights on. So at that time, we bought our first set of diesel generators, and where'd we put them? In manufacturing. That was our first place, just so we could be assured we'd keep the plant going if there were widespread outages. Now the things have run for good purpose, but so far, knock on wood, we haven't had um, any blackouts caused by lack of supply.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
But
one of the most interesting things to work out at when the Spokesman Review expanded their newspaper publishing building in the 1980s was there's a giant emergency generator in the basement because the paper is very proud of never having missed an issue, not even when the Great Fire happened. So they didn't want the power going out to be the reason that they missed out on that on meeting
mm-hmm.
that company goal. So yeah, companies and individuals will do that. Well, we could talk on all sorts of energy issues. I think I'd like to invite you to come back later and maybe get Representative Alex Ibarra on the line. Have you met uh, Representative Ibarra? I think he's the
I
only
don't believe
power.
I have.
He's a he's a mathematician and he's been in power generating business. I think he's the only person who understands the numbers as what in the legislature because that is his profession and he I think the two of you would could have a really interesting conversation. I'm going to hold that thought for this
I'd
next
love to meet him,
year. Okay, well, I
and I'd
think
love to join you again, Sulani. Thank you very much.
we will do that. Thank you for joining me, Ed.
It's my pleasure.
Okay. Thank you for joining me here on Forthright. Hoping to do more interviews like this. Subscribe on Substack if you'd like notification of new content, with or without a pledge. Happy to have you aboard.